Well, it's always good to come back to the scene of the crime. For those that don't know, I grew up as a teacher here, and previously Andy and Robert both poured themselves into my life and allowed me to come up here and flounder around and do what looked like teaching anyway. And then there came the day that they sent me out, which is exactly what our church is about, to first know and then grow and then go. And that's exactly what I was able to do. Well, anyway. So this is a plaque that's on my kitchen window. It's my wife's plaque, came from her mother. It says, "Along the way, take time to smell flowers." And we're going to take a walk through the book of Ruth. I mean, most people here have probably heard the story of Ruth a few times, okay? But we're going to take a walk through it, and there's going to be some flowers, so to speak, to smell along the way. And we're going to see something significant pop out of each chapter that should give us a fresh new look at God's sovereignty. We'll look at a few other details that I saw over the course of the study that literally gave me goose pimples to actually see God at work in that way. So, but you know, my dad has moved in with me. For those that don't know, finally, he's 94 years old. He rode a motorcycle until he was 90. Wow. And recently he decided that it was time to, but he likes to reminisce, okay? Look back over his life and see things. And there's a story that he likes to tell of when we were on vacation, and we were pulling this camper trailer, and the trailer hitch messed up. So he pulls over to a roadside park or a rest area and sends us down to have lunch while he looks at it, and he knows what to do to the trailer hitch. And he always carries his tools with him when he's on vacation. He's got that much smarts, but he had one problem. He didn't have a socket to fit what he needed to fit because it's big. And so he was sitting there leaning against the trunk, kind of kicking at the dirt, going, "God, I don't know what I'm going to do." And then he brushed the dirt away, and there was a rusty piece of metal. So he said, "I wonder what that is." So he gets a screwdriver and he digs up what's in there and he pulls it out and he cleans it off, and it's a socket. And the socket fit the nut. Now, by the way, the position of the socket was directly under the trailer hitch. Now, you can call that coincidence if you want to, okay? But I think that God went, you know what? He's going to need this, so I'm going to put it here. You know, my dad got rid of that car a long time ago, and he hasn't used that socket again, but he keeps it because he says, it reminds me that God is going to take care of me. You know? I mean, how do you explain the fact that, anyway, that it had to have been buried years ago because it was rusty, you know? But anyway, so we're in Ruth, and when Benjamin Franklin was ambassador to France, he was a member of this, the Infidels Club, interesting term. It was a group that spent a lot of time searching for and reading the most amazing literary masterpieces. And Franklin one day had the opportunity to tell them the story of Ruth. But he didn't mention who, he changed the names, okay? So they wouldn't know that it came out of the Bible. And that group, when he was all finished, said that it was one of the most beautiful short stories that they'd ever written, and they demanded to know what the source was. And Franklin took great pride in telling them it came out of the Bible. You know, so the story of Ruth begins with a lady named Naomi and her family, and they were living in Bethlehem. And what happened? a famine hit, right? Shortage of food, so they hightail it, right? And where did they go? To the land of Moab, around the Dead Sea, like 100 miles on foot. It takes a week to get there, you know. But what happened while she was there in Moab? Her sons get married. Do they marry good Jewish women? No, they marry Moabites, right? Well, and her husband has died. So they lived there about 10 years, and then her sons die. So she's got 2 daughters-in-law, and nobody keeping her there. And she hears that the famine in Bethlehem is over, so she says, you know what? I'm going home. And that's sort of where we pick up the story. So Ruth chapter 1 verse 7 says that Naomi starts heading for home, and her daughters wanted to go with her. But verse 8 says that Naomi tells them to go back to their mother's house. And back then, it was the father that was the provider and the protector of the family, and women really didn't have any rights. So why do you think she said, go back to your mother's house instead of to your father's house? See, the fathers were the providers, but references to the mother's house had to do with preparations for marriage. Okay, so as widows, these women really have no social or political status, no economic status. They're basically like the homeless people of today. Okay, we're totally dependent upon society for support, and so they need a husband to take care of them and provide for them, or they're probably going to wind up having to resort to, well, let's just say some less than moral career choices. Okay, there's a reason why they call it the world's oldest profession. But still, the girls persisted and wanted to go with her. But she says in verse 11, have I yet sons in my womb that you can have husbands? So what's up with that?
Well,
what is Naomi talking about there?
Well, she's concerned about that she doesn't have a heritage to offer them.
Right.
I mean, and if you think about it, even if she did have children, they couldn't be her son. I mean, couldn't be their husbands. I mean, so I'm really not sure what.
Right. Well, Levitical law actually says that, if you remember in Matthew 22, the scribes try to challenge Jesus with saying, okay, if this guy dies, you know, and his brother marries his widow, and then the next brother marries a widow, and the next brother marries a widow, who's going to be, you know, in heaven? Well, that's because of Levitical law that says the brother has a responsibility, right? So she's saying, look, I'm not going to have a kid, right? And so you're really not going to have any options if you come back with me. Your best bet would be to stay here and go back to your mother's house and find yourself a husband here. But Ruth won't have it. She says what? Where you go, I'll go. Where you die, I die. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people, right? So the sisters separate. Orpah goes back home. And Ruth decides to turn her back on her family, her culture, her religion, and go to someplace 100 miles away that has no certain future for her. At best, she's going to be a beggar. So that's why I say, bottom line, her choice to leave made no sense. But she travels on with Naomi, and they show up in Bethlehem at the beginning of harvest season, and according to Levitical law, there has to be some crop left behind by the harvesters so that the poor can come through and get the leftovers. As a matter of fact, sometimes they're told, look, just skip that one field altogether and let the people come in, because we've got to take care of the widows and the less fortunate and all that, right? Well, so Ruth chapter 2, the beginning of verse 3 says, so she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. Now, what's her mission? Her mission is to go and be seen as a good worker so that some guy will go, right? And pick her up as a wife. I mean, that's what she tells Naomi at the beginning of the chapter. Let me go out and glean in the fields so that I can find out someone, right? Well, when I was a kid, my dad had some property out close to Splendora that I wish we had today, because it's a really nice subdivision these days. But we would go out there on Saturdays. He and his buddies bought land that was right next to each other, and us kids, we would go out there and we'd tromp around while they were trying to clear land, right? And there's lots of stories to tell, but the thing was, we never knew whose land we were on. And there was one guy's land that wasn't part of my dad's friends that he didn't want us to tromp around his property, and we didn't know, we didn't know. It all looked the same, right? Just like this subdivision that's just south of here going in, okay? The infrastructure's there, and the roads are getting put in, but where are the property lines? How do you know who owns what property? I mean, for that matter, how can you tell, Mr. Homeowner, if your fence is on your side of your property line, or the other side of the property line, or right on it? I know I've got one house where the fence is like 4 feet over on my side of the property line, but it was there when I bought the house, so, oh well. I'm not going to buy a new fence. But how do you know? Well, when I was a kid, my dad used to get his metal detector, and he would go out into the yard and find where the metal detector would go off, and there's this metal thing down into the dirt really deep, and there's the property line right there. Well, it was the same thing back then. The fields were assigned by family, and then the tracks were put in triangles, and it was like, how far can you walk in a day or a week or a month or however long it was. But they put stone markers along the way. But if you're out there, well, Ruth, she's out there gleaning, right? Digging up crops. She doesn't know where she's at. She just wanted to be seen, and so when Boaz shows up, she happened to come to the part of the field that belonged to him. Okay? It's not like she knew where Boaz's land was and she stalked him. Okay? She was just out there doing her thing, and she happened to show up in the right place at the right time. Kind of a coincidence that she would be on the guy's property, right? That's why I say that her pick of fields came by chance. Okay? Well, moving on. In real estate, since we're talking about property markers, who knows what a right of first refusal is? Sometimes it's in other business dealings, but it's primarily a real estate term.
You in essence have an option on property.
People pay money. Here's a check. If you ever sell it, when I was a kid, we called it, I got first dibs. Okay? You got to let me buy it first at whatever your negotiated price is. It's not like I'm going to try to lowball you. It's like, you got an offer? Okay, you got to bring that offer to me and let me find out if I want to get the property first. Okay? Paid you good money for that. Well, eventually Naomi convinces Ruth, after Boaz, whenever he discovered her on his property, he really liked her work ethic, and he knew of her because he told her in chapter 2, look, I know your loyalty to your mother-in-law, and I'm really impressed by that. So look, here, I'm going to make some special provisions for you. and be sure that you work over here, and whenever the time comes when you get thirsty, you go drink over there. Because I want to make sure that you don't get mixed in with and get yourself in trouble. Okay? He kind of took her in and helped her. Not that he had to, he was just being a nice guy. Well, Ruth eventually convinces Naomi, look, you need to get dressed up and put on some perfume and go to the threshing floor and, go meet up with Boaz. Well, Boaz is like 3 sheets to the wind because he's been drinking and he's feeling merry and all this kind of stuff. And so he's passed out basically. And so she goes and uncovers his feet, like Naomi said, and lays down at his feet, right? Well, he wakes up around midnight and he says, "Who are you?" And she says, "I'm your servant." And she says, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you're a redeemer." Now, there's some scholars who want to point to this as she was offering herself to him sexually. But that's not the case. At least that's not the way Boaz understood it. Boaz understood it as she was offering him a marriage proposal. So, ladies, I think women's lib started a long time ago, okay? But Boaz says, it's true, I'm a redeemer, but there is someone who's closer. And that's why I say that Ruth's redeemer had to get consent. Okay. Well, knowing he had to get consent, he's a shrewd businessman, okay? This whole idea of redeemer, okay, let's stop here for just a minute. What does that term mean, by the way? What we call Jesus our redeemer, but I mean, what are they talking about whenever they're talking about the redeemer?
Well, there has to be a purchase. For Christ, it was his blood atonement for our sins, which redeem us back to God.
Right.
And then so, like a slave, they had to have a purchase price. So they had to have that freedom redeemed by a purchase price.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kinds of different redemptions.
Mm-hmm.
But usually there was something in exchange to purchase something.
Right. Well, in Hebrew, in this context, the word redeemer translates goel. It's not Noel, that's Christmas, but goel, okay? Deuteronomy 25 in verses 5 through 10 explains that a widow is not to marry outside of her husband's family, but she is to, like in the trap that they laid for Jesus, find the next brother. Well, if there is no brother, then there's this hierarchy, okay, of who's the next of kin. You've seen, the forms that people fill out, who's your next of kin, and they're not talking about your wife. They're talking about who's the closest blood relative. So in case we need organs or whatever, we know how to at least trace through the family history, right? Well, that's what a redeemer was. It was the closest living relative who can take on the responsibility of redeeming the widow. Okay? Well, in exchange, he gets the land. So, win-win, right? But since Naomi has no sons, the job of Goel fell to the closest relative of Elimelech. And while Boaz was in the family, he wasn't closest. There was somebody else that was closer. So, he's already wealthy. I mean, he's got people working for him. He's got land. He's just came by this one stretch of land at the time to just check on how things were going. Checked with his foreman. Finds out Ruth's been working all day. So, I mean, he's not in need, right? But he does very much like the idea of Ruth. Okay? So he has to figure out how to work this deal. He is a shrewd businessman. So he goes out to the gates of town where all the business is transacted. See, business is transacted here because that's where all the respectable people are. It's done in public, so it's done on the up and up and not behind closed doors, and plus there's eyewitnesses to commitments that people make. All right? So he goes out to the gates of town. He has a seat, and he waits for the next of kin to show up, right? And I love the way that King James puts this. He sees the guy coming by, and he says, "Oh, such a one, turn aside, sit down here." English Standard Version says, "Hey friend, come have a seat." Right? Have I got a deal for you? Well, see, the interesting thing is the Hebrew translates this "hey friend" or "hey such a one." It actually translates it basically so-and-so. We have no idea who this guy was by name. Nobody bothers to write it down. But Boaz says, Naomi wants to redeem Elimelech's land. And you're the one that's got right of first refusal. So right here at the gate, in front of everybody, I want to know, do you want to exercise your right? Because I'm next in line. Now, like I said, this would have been a really good deal for him because all he's got to do is take care of Naomi for a while, and she's already up in years, so that's not going to last very long. It doesn't impact him that much economically. And so he goes like, "Sure, I'll take it." And Boaz goes, "Well, did I mention that Ruth the Moabitess comes along in the package?" Oh, wait a minute. Hold the phone. It was one thing if I had to take care of one. But now you're giving me two. And plus, this second one, not only is she a Moabite, but she's young. So that means I gotta have her for a long time. And oh my gosh, what if she gets pregnant? And she has a son. That's going to muddy the waters related to the inheritance. So he says, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." And Boaz goes, "That's the answer I was looking for." So, scholars believe that the reason that the guy's name was left out was because refusing to shoulder the responsibility of being a Goel was a public disgrace. And Naomi actually had the legal right to walk up to him, take his sandal, and spit in his face right in front of everybody. Okay? Just saying. But that's just, people saying, yeah, we think maybe. But so Boaz and Ruth go on to get married, and they have a son. And what's his son's name? Obed, right? Who was Obed? Obed was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David, right? So they have Obed as a child, but ultimately, my last point is that her line would lead to the one God sent. But this is where it really gets good. I'm about to give you the stuff that gave me the goose pimples in the study, okay? What was Ruth's nationality again? Moabite, okay. So who were the Moabites? They were the descendants of a person by the name of Moab, right? Well, who was Moab? Okay. Think back to the story of Abraham. God tells Abraham, or Abram at the time, leave your family and go to a place that I will show you. So what did Abraham do? He took off. Did he leave his family behind? No. He says, hey, Lot, come with me. And, you read that story and you find out how many wonderful things happened there. Okay, Lot winds up in Sodom and he has to get rescued from, the hellfire that came down and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. But after that, he gets out there, his daughters go, we're kind of getting up there a little bit and we hadn't had any kids, so what we can do is we can get daddy drunk. And we can use daddy to get pregnant. Well, the oldest daughter gave birth to Moab. Okay. So Moab, his descendants produced Ruth, who is the mother or the ancestor of Jesus. Okay. But why is Ruth important? Well, Ruth, being a Moabite, is she Jewish? No. So if she's not Jewish, then she is a Gentile. Yes? Okay, get ready for it. Because Ruth is a Gentile. Jesus is a Gentile Jew, or a Jew Gentile, however you want to say it. Okay, I wouldn't say half-breed, but so what does that mean? That means that Jesus, under Levitical law, qualifies to be the kinsman redeemer of the Gentile, which is you. Okay? All because, you think about this, okay, this is like hundreds of years of orchestration by the divine director. Okay? Before he even walked up to Abraham, he knew Jesus needed to be part Jew and part Gentile to fulfill the law. He said to fulfill the law, right? He fulfills the law for the Jew, he fulfills the law for the Gentile. That's the thing that gave me goose pimples when I figured it out. Okay? So, but the only way that that could happen, like I said, is that it's part of the plan from the beginning. So to recap, Ruth's choice made no sense. Her pick of fields came by chance. Her Redeemer had to get consent, but ultimately her line led to the one that God sent. Okay? Seeing the ways that God has orchestrated human history down to the finest detail should give us confidence that He's also orchestrating things in our lives for His purposes and glory. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Like whenever your wife catches a kidney infection the very same day that your dad goes to the hospital and 2 days later your washing machine breaks. That's my life last weekend. How about that? But, here's something crazy. At the beginning of this teaching course, thus the video, I had to pick out of a big book 5 lessons to teach, to prepare. And of those 5, pick 1 to actually teach for video. Now, this was 7 weeks ago. Little did I know whenever I made all my decisions that I would be a week away from Christmas teaching about the ancestry of Jesus. Who knew? You know, coincidence or divine plan? You know, the older I get, the more they become synonyms with me. You know, I want to encourage you to be like my dad and reminisce. Look back over your life. What are your rusty sockets? You may not have trinkets like my dad does, but you've got trinkets up here that you can think of. Write them down. But more than that, be sensitive to what's happening now and what's going to happen later. Okay? And you'll, if you really pay attention, you're going to find out that God is at work in your life more than you ever realized to bring about His plan and His purpose and for His glory. I mean, you're as much part of God's sovereign plan for the ages as Ruth and Boaz. I just think you'll be amazed at how often God's in your life. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for giving us your word to show us who you are. It's always a wonderful thing to look back at history and see where you were at work, but it's even more amazing whenever we get to see you working in our own lives. I think it's awesome that you orchestrated my life in such a way that I would study and teach about the ancestry of Jesus just a week before Christmas. And I pray that as we go from here today, we leave with a better appreciation for your sovereignty, and that we'll take the time not only to reminisce about when you were working in our lives, but also to look for you in the future. I thank you for this wonderful time of the year when people all over the world are paying special attention to Jesus, the most amazing Christmas present of all time, and it is in His name that we pray. Amen.